You can have files that are named, like have like a capital R in the middle of them, when normally on a Windows file that wouldn't be the case. You can have different naming schemes with Linux files. So system calls is kind of how it works. So to start off, I'll show what WSL looks like in its current form. If I can drag this over. This is also, if anybody's heard of Windows Terminal, this is what this is. And with WSL, you're running essentially a Linux box within your Windows environment, and you can access all your Windows files. So that's System32 on your Windows host. And within this, you can run ifconfig like a normal Windows Linux box. And then if you want ipconfig, you just do ipconfig.exe to indicate it's a Windows file that you're trying to execute. And you're running Windows. Windows' version of ifconfig. And then the cool thing is the cross-compatibility. So right now I'm technically on a Linux box running a Windows program, but I can use grep to find a specific term in there. So like v4 would be something I want to find, and it would show me all of the IP addresses of the machine. So you can use cross-compatibility or not cross-compatibility, but you can use both the Windows and Linux together. And say, for example, this is pretty useful for scenarios where you're just sitting there and you're trying to accomplish something, and you have a box, but you don't necessarily know the commands for your Windows host. So you can just jump into WSL, and you can use a combination of both and still get the same result. So how to enable this is pretty interesting. If I can, yeah. So to enable, I'm trying to get used to this. So app, if you're wondering what this opens, just program files. And you go to turn Windows features on or off. And, oh, sorry. You'll get this box. And with this, you can turn on Windows Subsystem for Linux. And what that'll do is it'll require a reboot. And on the next reboot, you can actually install your distros. Installing distros is pretty easy as well. You just have to open up the Windows Store. I don't know if any of you guys actually use it or not. It's not super useful. But for WSL, just type Linux. Get the apps. And right now, there's only 4 distros you can actually choose from. Right now, I have Ubuntu and Kali installed. Those are my go-tos for the most part. And yeah, so that's WSL. I'll continue the presentation. So this is the current layout of WSL, and to kind of explain it a bit better. So when you're running applications, so like Bash and GCC, or like chmod, you can, what's actually happening with that is when you type those commands, you're typing that in a shell, and that goes to a program called LXCore. And it's not actually virtualized Linux kernel. It's Microsoft making their own application that interprets what your commands are actually doing. So the system call layer goes to the VFS, and the VFS is actually just those 4 the 4 blocks underneath. So the VOIFs will actually is all of the file system compatibility. So any files that are being changed physically on the machine, that handles that. So like the naming schemes, so say for example special characters, those are handled by that that program. And then their DRVFS will be any memory changes, so that'll be handled by that. And then the others are just extras for like NT kernel operations, so anything that doesn't have to do specifically with memory or specifically with file operations. So WSL2 is, it's actually a level 1 HyperV VM instead of WSL1, which is essentially an application that's running on your system. So as you can expect, it's 20% faster because it has access to the file system without having to go through a compatibility layer. So like anything, like if you're doing apt-get or you're installing something, that generally works a lot faster because it has access to your devices easier. And then, so right now it's using, or it will be using aliases instead of system calls. And then NetSock. So like say for example you're doing an Nmap scan, it actually has control over the sockets then. So right now WSL1 is more like a container if you've ever dealt with those, and then WSL2 would be like a level 1 VM and HyperV. So that's kind of the difference, and those are the performance. That's the performance chart kind of. So this is what Windows Terminal will look like. As you saw, it doesn't look like that right now. And on the subject of looks of Windows Terminal, I'm going to show how to actually configure Windows Terminal to your liking. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So as you can see, there's the little blur in the background, and it's actually transparent. And then, so if you go to settings, that'll actually open up VSCode if you have it installed. And this is how you configure your settings for Windows Terminal at the moment. If you guys have never seen a .json, I don't blame you. These are not fun. So kind of break this down. You go to your profiles. So this is opacity, or I think that's how you say it properly. Change that. That's the little blur in the background. Use acrylic. That's actually turning on the blur. Very simple stuff. And then this is the command line. So this is telling it what shell it wants to execute. And then, so this is so like if you're setting a default. So right now the default is PowerShell. This is what you would copy as your default. Yeah. So the default profile would be PowerShell. Okay. And then let me close out of this. Oh wow. Okay. It goes above. Okay. So you can see I have access to command line, PowerShell, and then also have access to my Unix boxes. So the reason that I say this is a container is because it's not actually, there's not an actual like visible store of where this is located on your C drive. There is a special way to access it. So with the run command again, you do WSL and then $, and then enter, and it should open up in another screen. Should open up your VMs, and you should be able to access your Unix file system from here. So everything right there. Back to the terminal. Start presentation mode again. Yeah. So VSCode and its integration to WSL, this is where WSL kind of shines and shows how it can be useful. So yeah, that's the whole background for that. So WSL can be useful with VSCode because VSCode can actually plug into WSL, and you can run your entire development environment right in essentially a Ubuntu box, and it's pretty seamless, honestly. So if you guys are into web development or any development, I would definitely recommend. I'll show how that works as well. And then today I'll be working with Node.js, NPM, and Express to actually set up a web server on a WSL box. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Okay. So, clear. Try not to fat finger this stuff too bad. Okay, so I'm gonna get out of this directory and go into my Linux file system. Let me remove this. Oof. Sudo. Wait. Oh, yeah, of course that wouldn't work. Sorry. Yeah, if Windows Terminal breaks in this whole process, it's part of the process, or it's part of the fact that it's an alpha right now, and it won't be released until like 2020 for like a full release. So actually making, let's make a directory like hello world, and change into that directory. Okay, and then I'm actually just going to copy commands because I'm fat fingering stuff really hardcore right now. So I'm going to actually do Express to build the web framework. If you guys have dealt with Express before, it's essentially like Apache, but heck. Sorry. This dual monitor setup's pretty interesting. Okay, so if you look at this now, that created these files. So for folders, these two files, the app.js will be the initialization, so that'll determine what port it's running on. It'll determine where the default HTML file is, and it'll determine a lot of like the routes that the traffic will take. So npm install is the Node package manager installer, and that'll actually kick off the process of making this web server. And yeah, the commands are right here, just saying. And that should only take about 5 seconds to actually build the web server. Okay, and then, oh, it's taking a little bit longer. It's not good. So npm start will start that web server once it's ready. Okay. It's the hot spot.
I noticed the hotspot was fast.
Okay. Well, I can go back to the PowerPoint because I have other stuff on here. So this is, sorry for the blinding white light. This is the Express file structure. So the bin, as I said, it's the executable file that determines the port. Public is, as you can see, it's like the style of the website, so anything that it can pull from, like JavaScript and CSS. So routes is for the handlers. So that's, I would say, I haven't messed with the routes at all. Usually you shouldn't have to with this. And then views is where your HTML code will go. So if you're setting up a web server and you know a bit of HTML, that's where you'd mostly put your files. Questions before I go on to the demo of this? Anybody? Okay. I'm just going to go on to the demo portion now.
How does this feel? It's not so bad. Now we can see you on the camera.
Okay. I'm going to change this display because it's in the opposite. Okay, I didn't take it out. That's good. So now I can just scroll over to it and it'll work properly now. So npm start will start up a web server if I do it with administrative rights. Okay, so npm is now working. And what I can do is navigate to the port that it's running on, which should be port 3000, it should say. Okay, let me move Firefox over. So localhost, sorry. Firefox is sabotaging itself right now. There you go. You're running a web server, even if that was a little painful. Okay. And the cool part is, let me open up VSCode again. And is there any way? That goes above the. There we go. So make a new file, and let's just make HTML essentially. Okay, I'm going to do this on a second screen. So what I'm doing right now is I'm making an HTML file. So like hello world.html. And with this, I can make what's called boilerplate code. And if you guys have dealt with HTML, this should look somewhat familiar. Okay, just do P1. Okay, that's good. That's good enough. That's good enough. Not gonna mess with it too much. Not looking for perfection on this. Okay, well, I might have locked myself out of this. Save that to the desktop. I'll get back to that. So change directory to how you access the C drive on WSL is you go to MMT C, and you should be able to see that here's all of my Windows files. So I can change directory to users, my account, the desktop where I stored the file, hopefully. Should be .html. No .html. Okay. Well, this is where I would get to the point where I show you why WSL integration with VSCode is pretty good, because you don't have to go through this process. You can actually just make the HTML file in WSL, save it in WSL, and then host it all in the same program essentially. So if I can make this full screen so it doesn't close me out again, we'll try that. this. Okay, so WSL actually has an extension in VS Code called Remote WSL. If you install that, you can actually get access to your VS Code, the shells for them. So if I click on this little button, new window using distro, and I select the distro I want, it'll actually open up another Visual Studio window that wants to open up on the other screen. And this will be, once it launches, because it's actually unpacking VS Code onto that, it's installing VS Code onto the WSL instance. I should be able to click New File and okay. What the heck? Okay. Came back over, maybe not. Yeah, there we go. There it is. So now that this is open again, I should be in WSL. Oh, okay. Open up WSL again. As you can see, this is pretty buggy because a lot of what I'm doing is still in alpha. So now it's actually running WSL on Ubuntu. New file, if I click save, that's where it's saving it as. So it's saving it in the home directory. I'll do HTML. So hello world.html. Okay, and then I'm gonna actually copy code because this takes too long. Okay. And the cool part is I shouldn't have to open up WSL again because I can just click New Terminal, and I'm actually running WSL again. So as you can see, here's the hello world, typed wrong, fat-fingered, in my home directory. And the cool thing is I don't have to use Express, I don't have to use npm. I can actually use Python to host or if Python wants to break itself again. So, oh yeah. Yeah, I know. I actually know what I did wrong. I have to specify a port? No? Okay, let me check one thing real quick. Python's installed. Python. Okay. So the module is http.server. And then hello world. My gosh. Okay. Well, I guess I'm not hosting my HTML file with simply Python. But usually when this runs, I can actually just host with a Python module. I can actually host that .html file and just access it through the browser. So if you're just doing quick testing and you're trying to learn front-end development, this is the easiest way to do it when Python works. So back to my PowerPoint. So what applications can I use for Python? So like PDFkit, that's pretty useful. You can actually turn any web page into a PDF. So Faker as well, that's pretty cool. You can generate fake data, so fake addresses, fake names, fake profiles, essentially. You can develop fake information for a slew of different applications. So like, I know that's pretty useful, like in the OSINT community. So the open source intelligence community kind of likes to use Faker a lot. Encryption you can use to encrypt files. So you can specify the encryption standard you want, the salt. You can specify the key. So there's also web scraping, which requires socks to do, or a socket to do. And if you've done web scraping before, you can pull certain elements from websites and parse that data down to exactly what you want. How are we doing on time? 7:32. Okay. So for using Faker, you pip install Faker is how you would do Faker, or install Faker. So let me open up Visual Studio again. If this will work now. So fake data.py. If I type that wrong. Okay, so import Faker, or from Faker, import Faker. And I believe the only reason this is necessary is because I believe that's the only reason that's necessary is because Faker has multiple modules, and just the data creation module is not, it's inside the package, so that's why you have to import a specific module for it. Fake is equal to that module. And so if I want to create a fake name, for example, and print that out, so I do print and then fake.name, and that's going to pull from the Faker module. And since I assigned fake to the Faker module, it should just give me a fake name that I can use for open source uses or anything along those lines. So I open up a terminal again. I should be able to see this. Yep. So Python fake data.py. Okay. My path might be broken again. Module name Faker. Okay, well at least I can explain what these are doing, and I can break down the code for you guys. So when you import the Faker module and set fake to Faker, what you're doing is you're essentially creating an object that you can execute within Python, and then when you use the attribute name, that's what it's telling it to do. So a password strength, I'm not going to go through this one if Python's not working. So what's a basic password strength test is I'm defining password strength as my function, and my pass input is pulling input from the user. So once you run the script, it's going to be like, hey, enter this password here. And then it's assigning, since my pass is equal to that input, if the length of that is greater than 6, print password's good. If length is less than or equal to 6, password is bad. And returning 0, and then you end the function with a return and password strength. So nmap port scan, this one's actually pretty cool. Sad I couldn't do it on WSL. Not yet. WSL can do it, or WSL2 can do it. Importing a socket. So sockets are pretty useful in Python. That's how you do a lot of your networking with sockets. So you setting, in this example, I'm setting server input to, or server input, yeah, okay. Yes, so it should be server IP. Input is target IP, so that's just pulling IP from the user. And then socket, get by host name. That's like a stack overflow, I think that's what it's called. That's essentially getting the host name of the device. And then print scanning host, and then that server IP, so it's telling you what it's doing. And then I made an array of the ports that I wanted to scan. And then there's actually a for loop that goes through those ports and scans each and every one of them. So in this, it's using for loops and some modules for this one. Yeah, I'm not going to go over that one. That's too painful. But these are my notes for WSL and Python. I can actually show you some cool tricks to do with WSL. So if you saw what I did earlier, where I was combining two commands together, if I can get it to move over. The problem with using, anybody see the mouse? No? Okay. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay. So the cool part is you can combine commands, WSL commands and Windows commands together. So you can create some pretty interesting results. So in this example, I have I'm sitting on my WSL box, and I can do the IP config. And I have to say .exe in order for it to understand that it's a Windows application it's running. And then I can actually use grep from Unix to actually pull certain information out of that. So say, for example, I want a 192 address. I could, can't be a super user when you're doing this stuff. Okay, so those are the IPs that are 192s. And you can do other things, like you can actually, instead of grep, you can do grep, and then if you want more data but you only know how to use find str, you can actually pipe that to find str, and you can continuously do this in and out between Windows and Unix. So the possibilities are pretty much endless with this. And once it matures more, it'll become a pretty stable platform for a lot of people in the InfoSec community. And there's countless examples of exactly how that works. Is there any, this is kind of extras, and here's my sources for all of this. So any questions from anybody on any of this? Doug.
Efficiency. I'm really kind of curious as far as like if you were using this to maybe you just had a script that you reported over and you're doing like some data processing or some port scans or some sweeps or doing something that's going to take a hot minute. Efficiency compared to just doing it in like a normal PowerShell terminal or some bash or something like that. What would that look like?
So efficiency in WSL. So the main difference between using WSL and something like PowerShell, I wouldn't necessarily say that you should. WSL is better for like a VM alternative, essentially. So something that requires you to use a VM, you might as well do it in WSL. If it doesn't require sockets, if it doesn't require networking, it's ultimately better in WSL because you don't have to boot up a box and you don't have to deal with a lot of the networking and slowdown issues that you would have with a normal VM. So like reading and writing to a file or something like log analysis would be much faster on WSL than doing it in a VM or doing any type of scanning on a VM. So does that answer your question a little bit, or is there? So like file operations on WSL are much faster, and if everything you're trying to do is purely command line based, then it would probably be better to do it in WSL. If it requires a GUI, I would do it in a VM or level 1 if possible. That's usually my recommendation with a lot of this, and especially for WSL1. It's better for development reasons right now, and then WSL2 would be better for I would say like network scanning and such like stuff like that you want to do on a Unix box, but you don't want to throw up an entire VM just to get that same result. Any other questions? Okay.
I was curious then again, as far as like, what if you were, have you tried it as far as doing anything remote, as in like remoting into a computer, throwing this up and then running some code, because maybe you don't have any code available, you don't know how to write the code to run on the Windows box, be like, hey, I know how to do this in a Linux language, or what have you. Have you tried anything like that? Does that work smoothly, or?
Yeah, so just like remoting and like doing an RDP into another machine and then
doing some like maintenance
WSL.
via something that's not Windows code.
Yeah, it works exactly how you think it would. I've used this to accomplish quite a few things that normally I would have to boot up a VM to do. So like hosting an entire website just straight on your Windows box, that's generally requires you to install quite a few packages, go through a bunch of installers, and then once you get to that point, you're kind of burnt out from all of the installing and stuff that you've had to do to get to that point, that it's kind of not even worth it. So remoting into a box, accessing WSL, I think it's pretty feasible. With WSL2 having its own sockets, the only concern is it going to be another device on the network? And I think for the most part, it's going to be using NAT, and then whenever you need to access a socket, it'll open up and then close exactly when you're done using it. So does that answer your question a bit? So like remoting in, it wouldn't be an exposed box. If you're from a security standpoint, WSL2 would not be an exposed box on the network, so you couldn't do a port scan against it. But like remoting in and just using it as a second terminal, essentially, that's works exactly how you'd think it would. So.
Have there been any vulnerabilities or any problems that have arisen yet from this that have that might cause some hesitation with implementing it on like a large scale, or turning it on by default? Yet.
So from what I understand, as of right now, since its networking capabilities are pretty limited and it's extremely containerized, I don't think it has any problems or it's had any like security vulnerabilities. But once you start throwing up NPM and something that has outward-facing APIs that are exposed to the web and then anybody can access, that's when you get into the issue of, oh, this is a security risk and you need to block it or something along those lines. So it's less of what WSL is doing, it's more of what are you doing with WSL to make your system vulnerable.
What color scheme are you using in code? That was really cool.
I was actually hoping somebody would ask that. That's cool. I think it's here. Let me just.
Show him the rainbow.
Oh, the rainbow. Okay.
Yeah, he missed that one.
Cobalt 2. Yeah, this is the theme that I'm using. So yeah, it's really bright. I have dark theme everything. I don't know if that really helped me today. So if I, let me open up a terminal again. And I'm on my Unix box. So let me get a really long command. So let me change the directories to the C drive, just to show you. Tree, let's pipe that to lolcat. There you go. It's a bunch of fun. Or you can use like Kawase or whatever you want to do with this. I mean, you can do it. I was playing around with something called MC earlier. So it's like the Linux, version of like a file explorer. Yep, Midnight Commander. So yeah. That answered the theme question. Any more questions?
Have you messed up your local machine?
Oh, dude, yes. So his question was, have you messed up your local machine? And yes, I've messed up my local machine. So at home on my desktop, I was trying to upgrade VMs or upgrade my WSL boxes to version 2, because that's completely an alpha. I don't even think it's an alpha. I think it's still in development at Redmond. And when upgrading to that on an unsupported version of Windows and trying to force that, I got in a BSOD loop and couldn't get out of it. So I tried to recover my files, couldn't work, and it was a mess. I did that once. I learned from that, launched a Windows 10 box in HyperV. It caused the same exact loop. So yeah, I've lost a lot due to WSL. So.
Hey Nolan, how old are you again?
I'm 19. Yep. Nerd status, wear it proudly.
I'd also mention that something that's kind of interesting about this is from a defender side, some people in the community kind of freak out about having Linux on a Windows box, because all of their defenses and how they're able to respond and see what's going on in the system changes if people start using it. It's not really bad per se to allow people to use it, but it adds an extra challenge. But what is really fun is that if you are looking at someone that's doing, basically running this on their system, because that file system you showed, it's just a file, right? You can easily pull that data. So you can pull the shadow, the command history, all that stuff very quickly off a box if you find one. So it's pretty fun,
so
actually.
The neat thing about this is the only way you can actually edit files that are in your WSL environment is through VSCode. So they've actually opened up an API in VSCode to specifically have read-write access on your WSL files. So if I try to access a WSL file on my Windows box, it'll be read-only completely. So modifying any of those files is kind of difficult, but I understand what from your point of view. Yeah.
Just want to copy it off, take a look at what they're doing.
Yeah.
That's my goal. That's my goal.
Yeah, it definitely in that view, I would say though if they have access to, is it a shadow copy, right? Is that what you said? If they have access to your WSL box, they most likely have access to your host at that point. So if they're getting this password, they might as well have the host password.
Just off Kyle's note, just think about from a SIMS perspective and staring at logs all day. Have you taken a look at yet to see what the Windows logs look like after running a bunch of commands in this?
So that's the thing about WSL 1, because this isn't. Microsoft essentially rewrote the Linux kernel to when you're running WSL commands, it's not actually a VM that it's calling back to. It's not running the Linux kernel. It's running NT kernel, and when you type something in, it's asking a compatibility layer. Hey, what does this do in Windows? In Windows' language, essentially. So when you do an ls, what is this actually in Windows? So like actually on WSL you can do dir, and you can use Windows commands in Linux as well. So from what your question was is, what does this look like at a log level? We won't know until WSL2 because the logs are not there. That you can't view the logs, as the compatibility layer right now is. I think it's just too complex to see those logs. You can't. All your logs are gone. Like. So yeah, from my point of view, anything you do on WSL cannot be recovered. It's completely incognito until WSL2, and then yeah, you can see your stuff. You can see everything that you're doing even from your Windows host. It'll be an event viewer.
Are they planning on like adding a bunch more event IDs and things like that then for this, or is it currently
I
like
haven't
in the
looked
mode
into
where
that.
you have to translate the Windows logs into what you think they're trying to do in this, or what?
So, from my understanding, the event IDs, I don't think they're adding any new event IDs. I think the event IDs will be, there'll be some that correspond to actions that are happening in WSL, and then any generics will be under one event ID. I don't think they're going to be classifying new event IDs from all of the articles I went through. It doesn't seem like that's the case, but I could be wrong. WSL2 is still in development, so everything changes. Don't know. That's the one question I couldn't really answer. That's only Microsoft knows that answer. Okay. More questions from Doug?
Anybody else?
Happy to answer them.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me.